Is the flying kangaroo heading for permanent grounding? Today, Qantas pleaded for help from the federal government, announcing it's slashing 1,000 jobs as it heads towards a $300 million loss for the first half of the financial year. Qantas shares lost more than 10% today on the back of the announcement, and ratings agency Moody's placed it on review for downgrade. The future of Qantas is now in jeopardy unless drastic changes are made, such as the government taking a stake in the airline or changing the law to allow it to be majority foreign-owned. Both prospects are sparking enormous political debate about whether the country still needs its own locally owned national carrier. Greg Hoy reports.
The bloody airfare battle raging across Australia's skies is bleeding the national carrier. Too many cheap seats and too few customers, according to Qantas's chief pilot.
We've had an underlying market that's weak, but the biggest issue that we're actually facing is that we're seeing the capacity being added, which we believe is uncommercial, being added to the market in order to fulfil a strategy that is causing Qantas damage both internationally and domestically.
So none of this. I think that really Qantas management pursued a shrink to glory strategy, which I think is going to, be very, very hard for them to find a way to fight their way out.
Ramping up his cry for regulatory or financial help from government today, Alan Joyce claimed Qantas is fast losing altitude, shedding $300 million in 6 months, with 1,000 job cuts planned in the next 12. He blamed his arch foe Virgin, which is now 63% owned by foreign airlines.
The Qantas Sale Act gives a competitor an advantage with their ability to go to 3 state-owned enterprises and have their domestic business funded by those airlines. It gives them an advantage.
Alan Joyce and his board have accepted a pay cut. Regardless, today's announcement triggered a tirade of abuse from Qantas management's many critics, who either don't trust the airline's figures or its management strategy.
We only think that there's one section of Qantas that needs to lose their jobs, and that's the Qantas board at the moment. I think they all should resign. They've led us down a track that has not been fruitful whatsoever, except for their own wages and back pockets. And unfortunately, 35,000 employees are now at behest of which direction they're next going to take it at the moment.
Before the government considers any changes to the Qantas Sale Act, the current Qantas management, Alan Joyce, Lee Clifford, the chairman, and the entire board need to go. And that's where the government and institutional shareholders need to have a say.
Well, Nick Xenophon, I think every other week calls on my resignation, so there's nothing new on that.
Qantas shares fell more than 14% with the profit warning, but analysts say that the airline had little or no choice but to cut costs and staffing levels as it faces fierce competition and the very real prospect that its credit rating may soon be cut.
Qantas must change. Its cost structure is up to 17% higher than Virgin's. So when you can't carry that cost structure around and not do something about it. And that's what they've really got to address. They've got to address work practices, inefficiencies, overstaffing. A whole range of issues have to be addressed aggressively to bring Qantas into line with what the market reality is.
Whilst we all hold a very dear place in our heart for Qantas, the truth of the matter is that I think they are in an ocean of pain.
Mark Carnegie is one of a syndicate of leading Australian businessmen, including John Singleton and Jeff Dixon, who recently toyed with taking over Qantas and selling off its different businesses to relieve the pain of long-suffering investors.
My business is trying to look after shareholders. I think the foreign ownership restriction makes it incredibly hard for Alan to work out what to do here, and I think you're driving him into a situation where he might well have to either sell or joint venture the international operations, which will really, really upset people whose love affair is with Qantas, the idea, more than Qantas, the business.
Today, there even seemed to be some sympathy for this view and Qantas management from the unions.
We're calling on the government today to step in to ensure that Qantas can be a viable national carrier for Australia and asking the government to make a decision to provide whatever support is necessary to ensure that that happens. And in doing so, the unions are also requesting that government assistance that goes in should also be conditional upon commitments about ongoing future secure employment for this important national carrier.
The federal government says it's listening.
I have not ruled out that if there is some specific thing that needs to be done to ensure that we have a strong Qantas in Australia, well, we're prepared to talk about it.
But some unions insist Qantas's biggest problems are of its own making.
The board at the moment has invested well over $1 billion in the Jetstar franchises, especially the ones that are in Asia. And at the moment, not one of the ones in Asia has turned a profit. They need to be aviation born and bred. I mean, really, this is the biggest problem. We have people in there that have run mining companies. We've had people in there that have been mathematicians at airlines. Unfortunately, that just doesn't cut it.
The only way for Qantas to get out of this nosedive is for Alan Joyce and the board to go. They have been an unmitigated disaster.
As the pressure intensifies on Qantas management, it's only just beginning for the federal government, which is caught in heavy crossfire over Qantas's predicament and whether it should intervene by either evening out foreign ownership restrictions between Qantas and Virgin or investing directly in Qantas.
There's 35,000 employees, 35,000 Australian families that depend on Qantas making sure that it does last. And I think at the moment that's the number one priority. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a signal that the government need to step in. The government need to step in and take control.
Status quo clearly cannot obtain. Radical change has got to happen in some way. I think Mr Joyce has said that today. The question is going to be who's going to blink, who's going to give, what is going to change.